The door slammed open hard enough to rattle the telegraph key on Delia Dalton's desk. She looked up to see Lucian Thornton filling the frame, his dark coat dusty from the trail. His tired eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her pulse skip. Behind him, 3 men she did not recognize were crossing the street toward the office at a walk that promised trouble. Lucian stepped inside and shut the door, then turned the lock without asking permission. Delia stood, her hand instinctively moving to the letter opener beside the inkwell. She had been expecting trouble for weeks, but not this kind, and not with the sheriff himself acting as her first line of defense. He moved to the window, glanced out, then looked back at her with an expression she could not read. It was not quite anger, not quite concern, but something sharper and more complicated. "You need to listen carefully," he said, his voice low and steady. "Those men work for Mason Greaves. They are here for you." Delia felt the floor tilt under her boots. Mason Greaves was the name she whispered in nightmares. The man who had loaned her father money 3 years ago and taken everything when the ranch failed. She still owed him $2,000, a sum so impossible she had stopped trying to count it. She had thought distance would keep her safe. Silver Prairie was 200 miles from the life she had fled, and she had built something small and stable here. The telegraph office was hers, or would be in another year if she could keep making payments to the town council. But Greaves had found her anyway. "What does he want?" she asked, though she already knew. Lucian stepped away from the window and moved closer to the counter. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her chin to hold his gaze, and she hated the way her breath caught when he leaned in. "Payment," he said simply, "or collateral. He is calling in your debt, Delia. And he has a territorial judge willing to sign an order if you do not settle." She gripped the edge of the counter hard enough to feel splinters bite her palm. "I do not have $2,000. I barely have 200. Lucian nodded, his jaw tightening. "I know." He paused, then added, "But I might have a way to buy you time. It is not clean, and you will hate me for it, but it will keep you out of his hands." Delia stared at him. Lucian Thornton had been sheriff of Silver Prairie for 6 months, brought in after the last man quit under suspicious circumstances. He was quiet, competent, and kept his distance from the townsfolk in a way that suggested he carried his own shadows. She had spoken to him maybe a dozen times, always brief exchanges when he stopped by to send a wire or check on trouble at the rail depot. She did not trust him, but she also knew desperation when she felt it crawling up her spine. "What way?" she asked. He took off his hat and set it on the counter between them. "Marry me." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Delia felt her mouth open, but no sound came out. Lucian did not smile, did not soften the statement with charm or explanation. He just watched her with those tired, unreadable eyes, waiting. Finally, she found her voice. "You have lost your mind." He shook his head slowly. "Greaves cannot touch you if you are married to a lawman. It gives you legal protection, and it gives me leverage to push back on that judge. We make it public, we make it fast, and we make it look real. You keep the telegraph office. I keep doing my job. Nobody has to know it is a bargain." Delia felt heat rising in her chest, part fury and part something she did not want to name. "And what do you get out of this?" she demanded. Lucian hesitated, and for the first time, she saw a crack in his composure. "A reputation," he said quietly. "This town does not trust me yet, A wife makes a man look settled, respectable, like he has something to lose. She wanted to laugh, or scream, or throw the inkwell at his head. Instead, she pressed her palms flat on the counter and forced herself to breathe. "You are asking me to lie to an entire town." He nodded. "Yes. And you are asking me to trust a man I barely know." He nodded again, slower this time. "Yes." She looked past him to the window, where the shadows of Greaves' men were still waiting on the street. One of them lit a cigarette, the flare of the match bright in the dimming light. She thought about the telegram she had received that morning, the one she had burned in the stove before anyone could see it. Greaves had given her 2 weeks. The deadline was 10 days away. If she ran, he would find her again. If she stayed and refused, he would take the telegraph office, her savings, and anything else he could legally strip from her. And if she accepted Lucian's offer, she would be tied to a man who might be using her just as ruthlessly as Greaves ever had. But Lucian had locked the door. He had stepped between her and danger without hesitation. And he was still standing there, waiting for an answer he had no right to expect. Delia straightened, met his eyes, and made a choice she knew she would second-guess for weeks. "All right. But I want it in writing. A contract. Terms. Limits. If this falls apart, I walk away with the office and my name intact." Lucian's expression did not change, but something in his eyes shifted. Relief, maybe, or respect. She could not tell. "You will have it," he said. "We do this tomorrow. Judge Fairfax can marry us at the courthouse. I will handle the paperwork, and I will make sure Greaves' men know about it before they try anything else." Delia nodded, her throat tight. She did not feel victorious. She felt like she had just signed away a piece of herself she might never get back. Lucian picked up his hat, settled it on his head, and moved toward the door. He paused with his hand on the lock and looked back at her. "For what it is worth," he said quietly, "I will keep you safe." That is not a lie. Then he unlocked the door and stepped out into the fading light, leaving Delia alone with the sound of her own heartbeat and the scratch of the telegraph key as a message came through from the depot. She did not move to answer it. She just stood there, staring at the empty doorway, and wondered if she had just made the worst mistake of her life, or the only one that might save it. The wedding happened at 10 in the morning, under a sky the color of old pewter. Judge Fairfax performed the ceremony in his office above the land registry, with his clerk and a rail depot manager serving as witnesses. Delia wore the same cream blouse and brown skirt she had worn the day before, with her faded shawl pulled tight around her shoulders against the autumn chill. Lucian stood beside her in a clean shirt and his dark jacket, his hat in his hands, his face unreadable. The judge read through the vows with the enthusiasm of a man filling out a bill of sale, and when he asked if they consented, they both said yes in voices that carried no warmth. Lucian produced a thin gold band from his pocket, plain and unadorned, and slid it onto her finger without ceremony. It fit. Delia did not ask where he had gotten it. When the judge pronounced them married, Lucian did not kiss her. He just nodded once, signed the register, and handed her the pen. They walked out of the courthouse together, and the news spread through Silver Prairie like wildfire in dry grass. By noon, half the town knew. By evening, everyone knew. Delia returned to the telegraph office and tried to work, but customers kept stopping by with thinly veiled questions and poorly disguised curiosity. She answered them all with the same calm, clipped tone. Yes, it was sudden. No, there had been no engagement. Yes, she was very happy. The lies tasted like ash, but she delivered them with a straight face and a steady hand. Lucian spent the day making rounds, checking in at the saloon, the livery, the general store. He was doing what sheriffs did, but Delia knew he was also making sure people saw him, saw the ring on her finger, and drew the conclusions he wanted them to draw. That night, he came to her room above the telegraph office, with a folded contract in his hand. She let him in without a word, and sat at the small table by the window while he laid out the terms. They had agreed to live separately for appearance's sake, but to attend church together on Sundays and share meals in public when necessary. He would not press for physical intimacy, and she would not interfere with his work. If either wanted to end the arrangement, they would give 30 days' notice and dissolve the marriage quietly, with her keeping the telegraph office and any assets she brought into the agreement. Lucian had written it out in clear, careful script, and he signed it in front of her before sliding it across the table. Delia read it twice, then signed her name at the bottom. They did not shake hands. They just sat there in the lamplight, two strangers bound by law and necessity, and tried not to think about how fragile the whole structure really was. 3 days later, Mason Graves arrived in Silver Prairie. Delia saw him from the telegraph office window, stepping down from a hired coach in front of the Silver Dust Hotel. He was a tall man with graying hair and the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. He wore an expensive coat and carried a leather satchel that probably held every piece of paper he needed to destroy her. Delia felt her stomach twist, but she forced herself to stay at her desk and keep working. She had sent Lucian a wire an hour earlier, a single word. Here. She did not know if he would come, or if the marriage would hold any weight against a man like Greaves. But she had no other cards to play. She kept her hands busy transcribing messages, her face calm, and waited. Greaves did not go to the hotel. He came straight to the telegraph office. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside, and Delia looked up with a polite, professional expression that cost her everything to maintain. "Mr. Greaves," she said evenly. He smiled, that cold, empty smile, and set his satchel on the counter. "Mrs. Dalton," he said, drawing out her old name like a weapon. "Or is it Mrs. Thornton now? I heard the most interesting rumor." Delia met his eyes without flinching. "It is Mrs. Thornton. And it is not a rumor." Greaves tilted his head, studying her the way a man might study a horse he was considering buying. How convenient. A sudden marriage to the town sheriff, just days before your debt comes due. One might almost think you were trying to avoid your obligations. Delia straightened, her hands flat on the counter. "I am not avoiding anything. I fully intend to settle my father's debt. But I will do it on terms that do not involve surrendering property that belongs to me." Greaves laughed, a low, humorless sound. "Property that belongs to you. My dear, you signed a lien on that telegraph office the day you took out the loan for your father. If you default, I can foreclose. The marriage changes nothing." Delia felt ice slide down her spine, but she kept her voice steady. "Then we will see what a judge says." Greaves leaned in, his smile sharpening. "Oh, we will. I have a hearing scheduled for next week. Judge Carver is an old friend. I am sure he will be very sympathetic to my position." The door opened behind Greaves, and Lucian walked in. He moved with the kind of quiet economy that made him seem larger than he was, and when he stopped beside Greaves, the older man took a half step back. Lucian looked at Delia first, a question in his eyes. She gave a tiny nod. Then he turned to Greaves. "Mr. Greaves," Lucian said, his tone flat and professional. "I am Sheriff Thornton. I believe you have business with my wife." Greaves recovered quickly, his smile returning. "Sheriff, how fortunate. I was just explaining to Mrs. Thornton that her recent marriage does not absolve her of financial responsibility." Lucian nodded slowly. "That is true. But it does mean any legal action against her assets will now involve me as well. And I have a few questions about the terms of that original loan." Greaves' smile faltered. "Questions?" Lucian pulled a folded paper from his jacket and set it on the counter. "I pulled the county records this morning. Your lien was filed 6 months after the loan was issued, which is unusual. The original contract does not mention property as collateral, only personal assets. That makes your claim on the telegraph office questionable at best." Greaves' face hardened. "You are playing a dangerous game, Sheriff." Lucian met his gaze without blinking. "No, Mr. Greaves. You are. And I am telling you right now, if you want to pursue this, you will do it in open court with every record on the table. I will make sure of it." Greaves stared at him for a long moment, then picked up his satchel and stepped back. "We will see," he said coldly. "Enjoy your marriage while it lasts." Then he turned and walked out, leaving the door open behind him. Delia let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Lucian closed the door, then turned to face her. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. "How did you know about the lien?" He shrugged. "I did not. But men like Greaves always cut corners. I took a guess." Delia stared at him, something shifting in her chest. He had walked in here with nothing but a hunch and a willingness to stand between her and a man who could ruin them both. That was not strategy. That was something else entirely. "Thank you," she said quietly. Lucian nodded, then picked up his hat from the counter. "We are not done with him yet. But we bought some time." He paused at the door, glanced back, and added, "If you need anything, send word. I will come." Then he left, and Delia sat down at her desk, staring at the gold band on her finger, and wondered when exactly her fake husband had started feeling like something real. The next few days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Delia ran the telegraph office. Lucian made his rounds, and the town watched them with the kind of interest that bordered on obsession. On Sunday, they attended church together, sitting in the third pew with enough space between them to be proper, but close enough to suggest comfort. Afterward, they walked Main Street side by side, and Lucian bought her a peppermint stick from the general store without asking if she wanted it. She took it anyway, and when she thanked him, he almost smiled. Almost. That night, he walked her back to the telegraph office and waited while she unlocked the door. "Sleep well," he said, and she realized it was the first time he had said anything to her that was not about Greaves, the town, or their arrangement. She watched him walk away into the dark, his coat collar turned up against the wind, and felt something warm and complicated settle in her chest. But the fragile peace shattered 4 days later, when Delia received a wire from the territorial marshal's office. It was brief, formal, and devastating. Sheriff Lucian Thornton was wanted for questioning in connection with a shooting in Carson City 2 years prior. A witness had come forward. A hearing was scheduled. Delia read it 3 times, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She did not know what to believe. Lucian had never talked about his past, never offered more than the barest outline of where he had come from or why. She had assumed he was private, careful, maybe running from something small. But this was not small. This was the kind of accusation that could end a career, a reputation, a life, and it had Mason Greaves' fingerprints all over it. She found Lucian at the jail, a narrow building at the end of Main Street, with barred windows and a wood stove that barely kept the cold out. He was sitting at his desk, cleaning his revolver with the kind of focus that suggested he was trying not to think about something. Delia walked in without knocking and set the telegram on the desk in front of him. He looked at it, his face going very still. Then set down the cleaning rag and met her eyes. "When were you going to tell me?" she asked, and her voice came out harder than she intended. Lucian leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "I was not." Delia felt anger flare hot and fast. "You married me. You tied your name to mine. And you did not think I deserved to know you were wanted for murder." Lucian stood slowly, his hands open and empty. It was not murder. It was self-defense. And it was ruled justified at the time. This witness is lying, or being paid to lie. Either way, Greaves is behind it. Delia crossed her arms, holding herself together by sheer force of will. "Then prove it." Lucian shook his head. "I cannot prove a negative, Delia. The best I can do is show up, tell the truth, and hope the marshal believes me." "And if he does not," she asked, "what happens to me? What happens to this arrangement? What happens to the town when they find out the man they trusted was a fraud?" Lucian flinched, and she saw real pain flash across his face. "I am not a fraud. I have done this job honestly. I have kept this town safe. And I have kept you safe." She knew that was true. She hated that it was true, because it made everything so much more complicated. "Why did you really offer to marry me?" she asked, and her voice cracked on the last word. Lucian looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something raw and unguarded in his expression. "Because I knew what it felt like to owe a debt you could never pay. Because I knew what it felt like to be trapped by your past. And because when I saw you standing in that office, ready to fight even though you were terrified, I thought maybe we could help each other survive. That was all I wanted. Survival." Delia felt tears sting her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "And now," he said quietly, "I want you to be safe even if I am not. If the marshal takes me in, you go back to your maiden name, you dissolve the marriage, and you tell everyone I lied to you too. You protect yourself. I will sign whatever you need." She wanted to scream at him, or hit him, or do something that would release the pressure building in her chest. Instead, she walked forward, picked up the telegram, and tore it in half. Lucian stared at her. "What are you doing?" She met his eyes, her jaw set. "I am not dissolving anything. If you go to that hearing, I go with you. If they take you in, I will find a way to clear your name. You stood between me and Greaves when you had no reason to trust me. I am returning the favor." Lucian shook his head slowly. "Delia, you do not owe me that." She stepped closer, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders, the way he was holding himself together by sheer stubbornness. "Maybe not. But I am giving it anyway. Because whatever this started as, it is not fake anymore. Not to me. The silence that followed was thick and charged, and Delia realized she had just said something she could not take back. Lucian reached out slowly, carefully, and touched her hand where it rested on the desk. His fingers were warm, rough from work, and the contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. "I do not deserve you," he said, his voice low and rough. She smiled, bitter and sad. "I do not deserve peace, but I want it anyway. Maybe we are both just selfish." He almost laughed. A short, pained sound. "Maybe." Then he squeezed her hand once and let go. "The hearing is in 3 days. If you are coming, pack light. We leave tomorrow morning." They took the noon train east, sitting in a passenger car that rattled and swayed over uneven track. Delia had packed one small bag with a change of clothes, her savings, and the marriage contract Lucian had written. She did not know what she would need, but she wanted proof that they had entered this arrangement with clear terms and honest intent. Lucian sat across from her, his hat pulled low, his eyes on the passing landscape. He had barely spoken since they left Silver Prairie, and Delia did not push. She understood silence. She had lived in it for years. Instead, she watched the prairie roll by, golden and endless, and tried not to think about what would happen if the marshal did not believe them. They arrived in Carson City at dusk, the sky bruised purple and orange, the streets crowded with freight wagons and travelers. Lucian found them a boarding house near the rail depot. 2 rooms on the 2nd floor with a shared washroom at the end of the hall. He paid for both rooms without comment, then carried her bag upstairs and set it inside her door. "Get some rest," he said. "The hearing is at 10. I will meet you downstairs at 9. Delia nodded, then caught his arm before he could leave. "Lucian." He stopped, his eyes shadowed under the brim of his hat. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I meant what I said." He held her gaze for a moment, something unspoken passing between them, then nodded and walked away. Delia did not sleep. She lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the boarding house settling, the creak of floorboards, the distant murmur of voices. She thought about Lucian, alone in the room next door, carrying the weight of a past he had never asked her to share. She thought about the contract in her bag, the careful terms they had written to protect themselves from each other. And she thought about the moment in the jail when he had touched her hand, and how it had felt like a promise neither of them knew how to keep. Somewhere around midnight, she heard his door open, and his footsteps moved down the hall. She sat up, listening, and heard the front door of the boarding house close quietly. She did not know where he was going, but she knew he was not running. He had come this far. He would see it through. The hearing took place in a stuffy courtroom that smelled like old wood and lamp oil. Delia sat in the back row, her hands folded in her lap, and watched as Lucian stood before the territorial marshal and a circuit judge she did not recognize. The witness was a thin man with nervous eyes and a story that sounded rehearsed. He claimed Lucian had shot an unarmed man during a dispute over a card game, then fled before charges could be filed. The marshal asked careful, pointed questions, and the witness answered them all with the kind of confidence that came from repetition. Delia felt her stomach churn. It was a good lie, well constructed, and she could see the judge considering it seriously. Then Lucian spoke. He did not defend himself with emotion or outrage. He simply laid out the facts. The man he had shot had drawn first, in front of 6 witnesses, including the town doctor and a deputy. The shooting had been investigated, documented, and cleared. He provided names, dates, and the location of the original report. Then he looked at the witness and said, in a voice that carried no anger, only certainty, "You were paid to come here. Tell me who paid you, and I will make sure you walk out of here without charges." The witness hesitated, his eyes darting to the back of the room. Delia followed his gaze and saw Mason Greaves sitting in the last row, watching with that cold, empty smile. The witness looked back at Lucian, then at the judge, and his face crumpled. "I cannot," he whispered. The judge leaned forward. "Cannot, or will not?" The witness swallowed hard. "Both." The judge sighed, then looked at the marshal. "This hearing is a waste of my time. The charges are dismissed. Sheriff Thornton, you are free to return to your duties. And Mr. Greaves, if I see you in my courtroom again with a fabricated witness, I will hold you in contempt." Greaves stood slowly, his smile never wavering, and walked out without a word. Delia felt relief crash over her so hard she thought she might faint. Lucian turned, found her in the crowd, and something in his expression broke open. She stood and walked toward him, and when she reached the front of the courtroom, he caught her hand and held it tight. "Let us go home," he said quietly. But they did not go home. Not yet. Because Greaves was waiting for them at the rail depot, flanked by 2 men Delia recognized from Silver Prairie. He stepped in front of them as they approached the platform, blocking their path with the casual arrogance of a man who believed he had already won. "Sheriff Thornton," he said pleasantly. "Mrs. Thornton, I trust the hearing went well." Lucian did not let go of Delia's hand. "It did. Step aside." Greaves tilted his head. "I am afraid I cannot do that. You see, I have another matter to discuss. It seems your wife's father signed a second agreement before he died. One that transfers his outstanding debt to his next of kin in the event of default. That would be Delia. And since she is now married, that debt legally extends to you as well." Delia felt the ground shift under her. "No, that is not possible. I never signed anything like that." Greaves smiled. "Your father did. And it is fully enforceable. I have the document right here." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. Lucian stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Let me see it." Greaves handed it over with a flourish. Lucian read it quickly, his jaw tightening with every line. Then he looked up, his eyes cold. "This is a forgery. The signature does not match any document on file in Silver Prairie. I checked." Greaves shrugged. "Prove it." Lucian handed the paper back. "I do not have to. You just confessed to fraud in front of witnesses." He gestured to the depot clerk, a rail agent, and 3 passengers waiting for the train. All of them were watching now, and Greaves's smile finally faltered. "You are bluffing," Greaves said, but his voice had lost its certainty. Lucian shook his head. "No, I am done playing your game. You want to take this to court, we will go to court. But I will bring every record, every witness, and every piece of evidence that shows you have been running a fraud operation across 3 territories. And when I am done, you will not just lose this case. You will lose everything." Greaves stared at him, his face going pale, then red. You have no idea who you are dealing with. Lucian stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that Delia barely heard. Yes, I do. You are a bully and a coward who preys on people with no power. But she has power now. She has me, and I will burn your empire to the ground before I let you take one more thing from her. The silence stretched, taut and humming with tension. Then Greaves stepped back, his hands shaking with suppressed rage. This is not over, he said. Lucian smiled, cold and final. Yes, it is. Now get out of my sight before I arrest you for harassment. Greaves turned and walked away, his men following, and Delia felt something inside her unclench for the first time in years. Lucian turned to her, his expression softening. Are you all right? She nodded, then shook her head, then laughed, a wild, breathless sound that was half relief and half disbelief. I think so. I do not know. He smiled, a real smile this time, and it transformed his face. Come on, let us go home. They boarded the westbound train and found seats near the back, away from the other passengers. Delia sat by the window, watching the city fall away behind them, and Lucian sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The train rocked and swayed, the rhythm almost soothing after the chaos of the past few days. Finally, Delia turned to him and said, You did not have to do that. Lucian looked at her, his eyes tired, but steady. Yes, I did. She shook her head. You could have walked away. Let me handle it. You had no obligation. He reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing over the gold band on her finger. I had every obligation. You are my wife. The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. Delia looked down at their joined hands and felt her chest tighten. That was supposed to be pretend. Lucian was quiet for a moment, then said, When did it stop feeling pretend to you? She met his eyes, and the honesty there took her breath away. I do not know. Maybe when you stood between me and Greaves the first time. Maybe when you walked into the jail and tore up that telegram. Maybe when you held my hand in the courtroom and I realized I did not want to let go. He smiled, slow and careful. Same. Delia felt tears prick her eyes, and she did not try to stop them. So what do we do now? Lucian leaned in, his forehead almost touching hers. We go home. We keep doing what we have been doing. Except this time, we do it because we want to, not because we have to. Delia nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Lucian kissed her then, gentle and tentative, and she kissed him back with everything she had been holding inside for weeks. When they finally pulled apart, the train was rounding a bend, and the prairies stretched out before them, endless and golden in the fading light. Delia rested her head on his shoulder, and Lucian wrapped his arm around her, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. They returned to Silver Prairie 2 days later to find the town buzzing with rumors. Some said Lucian had been arrested. Some said he had fled. Some said Delia had gone with him, which meant the marriage was real, which meant everything they thought they knew was wrong. Delia walked into the telegraph office on a bright, cold morning, unlocked the door, and found a stack of messages waiting for her. She sorted through them methodically, answering each one, and by noon, the truth had spread. The sheriff was back. The marriage was real. And Mason Greaves had been run out of Carson City by a territorial judge who did not tolerate fraud. Lucian spent the day making rounds, shaking hands, answering questions with his usual quiet competence. But that evening, he came to the telegraph office and knocked on the door. Delia let him in, and he stood there in the lamplight, his hat in his hands, looking uncertain for the first time since she had met him. "I know we said we would live separately," he began. Delia crossed the room and kissed him, cutting off whatever careful speech he had prepared. When she pulled back, she said, "That contract is void. We are rewriting the terms." He smiled, that rare, transforming smile that made him look years younger. "What are the new terms?" She took his hand and led him to the small table by the window, where the old contract still sat, folded and forgotten. She picked it up, walked to the stove, and dropped it in. The paper curled and blackened, the careful script disappearing into ash. Then she turned back to him and said, "No more conditions, no more limits, no more pretending. Just us, figuring it out as we go." Lucian pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her, and she felt the tension finally leave his body. "I can do that," he said quietly. "Good," she whispered, "because I am not letting you go." They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and the town outside went on with its business, unaware that the story it thought it knew had just been rewritten entirely. But peace never lasted long in a town like Silver Prairie, and trouble found them again 2 weeks later in the form of a wire from the territorial marshal. Greaves had filed a civil suit claiming defamation and wrongful interference in a business contract. The hearing was set for the following month, and if he won, he could seize assets from both Delia and Lucian to cover damages. Delia read the telegram twice, her stomach sinking, then handed it to Lucian without a word. He read it, his jaw tightening, then set it on the desk. "He is desperate," Lucian said. "This is his last move." Delia nodded, but the fear was there, coiled tight in her chest. "What if he wins?" Lucian looked at her, his expression steady. "Then we fight it. We bring every witness, every document, every piece of proof we have, and we make sure the judge sees him for what he is." Delia wanted to believe him, but doubt was a hard thing to shake once it took root. What if it is not enough? What if we lose the telegraph office, the house, everything? Lucian reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle but firm. "Then we start over. Together." "I am not going anywhere, Delia. I meant every word I said on that train." She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, and tried to hold on to that certainty. "All right. We fight." He kissed her forehead, then stepped back. "I need to send some wires. See if I can track down the original witnesses from Carson City. You keep things running here. If anyone asks, we are handling it." Over the next 3 weeks, they worked like soldiers preparing for a siege. Lucian dug through county records, tracked down witnesses, and wrote letters to marshals and judges across the territory. Delia kept the telegraph office running, fielding questions and deflecting gossip, with a calm professionalism that hid the fear gnawing at her insides. They ate dinner together every night, sometimes at the boarding house, sometimes at the small table in her room above the office. They talked about the case, about the town, about small, ordinary things that had nothing to do with lawsuits or danger. And slowly, without either of them planning it, the space between them closed. He started staying later. She started touching his hand more often. And one night, when he stood to leave, she asked him to stay. He did. And in the quiet hours before dawn, with the town still sleeping and the prairie wind rattling the window, Delia finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they were going to be all right. Lucian held her close, his breath warm against her hair, and whispered, "I love you." She felt the words settle into her chest, like a key turning in a lock. "I love you too," she whispered back. "And I am not afraid anymore." He kissed her, slow and deep. And when the sun finally rose, they were still tangled together, the contract long forgotten, the fear pushed back by something stronger and infinitely more stubborn. The hearing took place in Silver Prairie's courthouse, a small but dignified building at the edge of town. The entire town turned out, packing the benches and spilling into the hallway outside. Greaves arrived with a lawyer from Carson City, a sharp-eyed man in an expensive suit who looked like he had never lost a case. Lucian and Delia sat at the plaintiff's table with a local attorney named Calloway, a steady, gray-haired man who had agreed to take the case for a fraction of his usual fee. The judge was a circuit appointee named Harrow, a woman in her 50s with a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for theatrics. She called the court to order, and the room fell silent. Greaves' lawyer opened with a polished, devastating argument. He painted Delia as a debtor who had fled her obligations, and Lucian as a corrupt sheriff who had abused his authority to shield her from justice. He produced the forged document, claiming it was legitimate, and called a handwriting expert who testified that the signature matched Delia's father's hand. He was smooth, confident, and convincing, and Delia felt her heart sink with every word. When he finished, Judge Harrow looked at Calloway and said, "Your response." Calloway stood, adjusted his spectacles, and began to dismantle the case piece by methodical piece. He introduced testimony from the original witnesses in Carson City, affidavits from the town doctor and deputy who had been present during the shooting, and county records that showed Greaves had filed multiple fraudulent liens across the territory. Then he called Lucian to the stand. Lucian stood, walked to the witness box, and placed his hand on the Bible. He answered every question with calm, unshakable honesty. Yes, he had married Delia quickly. Yes, it had been a strategic decision at first. But no, he had not lied about the debt, the lien, or his past. He had acted within the law, and he had done everything in his power to protect someone who had no one else to stand for her. When Greaves' lawyer tried to rattle him with pointed questions about his motives, Lucian looked directly at Delia and said, "I married her because I saw someone worth fighting for, and I would do it again." The courtroom was silent. Even the lawyer had no follow-up. Then Calloway called Delia. She walked to the stand on shaking legs, placed her hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. Greaves' lawyer tried to paint her as opportunistic, reckless, dishonest. But every question gave her a chance to tell her story. She talked about her father's failed ranch, the loan that had seemed like salvation, the way Greaves had swooped in after the bankruptcy and claimed everything. She talked about running, hiding, building a new life in Silver Prairie, with nothing but hope and stubbornness. And she talked about Lucian, the man who had offered her a way out when she had none, and who had become the person she trusted most in the world. When she finished, there was not a dry eye in the courtroom. Judge Harrow called a short recess, then returned with a verdict. She looked at Greaves, her expression cold, and said, "Mr. Greaves, this court finds your claim to be without merit. The document you presented is a forgery. Your liens are fraudulent, and your conduct throughout these proceedings has been reprehensible. Your suit is dismissed with prejudice, and I am forwarding my findings to the territorial attorney for potential criminal charges. You are ordered to pay court costs and restitution to Mrs. Thornton in the amount of $500. Case closed. She struck the gavel once, and the courtroom erupted in applause. Greaves stood frozen, his face pale, then turned and walked out without a word. Delia felt Lucian's hand close around hers, and she looked up to see him smiling, real and warm and unguarded. "We won," he said quietly. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. We won. That night, Silver Prairie threw an impromptu celebration in the street outside the courthouse. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else brought whiskey, and before long, half the town was dancing under the stars. Delia stood on the boardwalk, watching, and Lucian came up beside her with 2 cups of cider. He handed her one, and they stood there together, shoulders touching, while the music swirled around them. "This is not what I expected when I came to Silver Prairie," she said. He smiled. "What did you expect?" She shrugged. "Loneliness. Work. Maybe a quiet life where nobody asked too many questions." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "And now?" She looked up at him, her heart full to bursting. "Now I have everything I did not know I needed." Lucian set down his cup and took both her hands in his. "I want to give you more than survival, Delia. I want to give you a life. A real one. A home. Whatever you want, we will build it together." She felt tears sting her eyes again, but this time they were the good kind. "I just want you. That is enough." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, while the town cheered and the fiddle played, and Delia realized that for the first time in her life, she was not running, not hiding, not pretending. She was standing in the light, loved and chosen, with a man who had fought for her when no one else would. And that was worth every risk, every fear, every moment of doubt. The following spring, they bought a small house on the edge of town, a modest place with a front porch and a view of the prairie. Delia kept running the telegraph office, and Lucian kept wearing the star, and they built a life that was ordinary and extraordinary, all at once. They had disagreements, of course. She was stubborn, and he was proud, and neither of them had ever been particularly good at asking for help. But they had learned how to fight fair, how to forgive, and how to hold each other when the world felt too heavy. And on quiet nights, when the wind howled across the plains and the stars burned cold and bright overhead, they would sit on the porch together, wrapped in blankets, and talk about the future. Delia never heard from Mason Greaves again. Rumor had it he had been arrested in Carson City on multiple counts of fraud and was serving time in a territorial prison. She did not celebrate his downfall, but she did not mourn it either. She had spent too many years living in fear of him, and she refused to give him any more of her life. Instead, she focused on what she had built. The telegraph office thrived. Lucian earned the town's trust and respect, and slowly, quietly, They became the kind of couple people pointed to as proof that love could grow even in the hardest soil. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie, Lucien reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. He handed it to Delia without ceremony, and she opened it to find a delicate silver locket on a thin chain. Inside was a tiny photograph of the two of them, taken on their first anniversary by a traveling photographer who had passed through town. Delia looked up at him, her eyes shining. "When did you do this?" He shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Last month. I wanted you to have something that was just ours. Not a contract. Not a bargain. Just us." She fastened the locket around her neck, then leaned over and kissed him. "I love you," she whispered. He smiled. "I know. And I love you too." Years later, when people asked how they met, Delia would smile and say, "He saved my life." And Lucien would shake his head and say, "No, she saved mine." And they would both be right. Because love, real love, was not about grand gestures or fairy tale endings. It was about showing up when it mattered, standing firm when the world pushed back, and choosing each other over and over again, even when it was hard. Especially when it was hard. They had started as strangers bound by necessity, two broken people trying to survive. But they had become something neither of them had dared to hope for. A family, a partnership, a love that could weather any storm. And that, Delia thought, was the best story she had ever been part of.